In the quiet towns and winding suburbs of Washington state, the story of Nicole Pitts began with hope, resilience, and the dream of a better future. Born on February 26, 1973, in King County, she was the only child of a troubled marriage that fell apart during her school years. Despite the pain that came with her parents' divorce, Nicole was a bright, charismatic girl, an athletic and energetic teenager, beloved by her peers. She thrived in school and adored spending her summers at Lake Sammamish, just east of Seattle. Her life seemed full of promise. After high school, Nicole enrolled at Western Washington University to study public relations. At the same time, she poured her energy into fitness and sports, ultimately landing a job as a fitness trainer at a local gym. Her dedication and charm quickly earned her the admiration of clients and colleagues alike. With time, she returned to school again, this time for a degree in management. Eventually, she was hired by a major mobile communications firm. On the surface, she had it all: a strong career, a healthy lifestyle, and a warm, friendly persona that drew others to her. But beneath this polished exterior was a hidden pain that had long been festering. The trauma of her parents' separation during her formative years had left deep emotional scars. Nicole, still young and vulnerable, found herself in the grip of rebellion and bad influences. What began as occasional drinking soon turned into a crippling alcohol addiction. Her mother, Gail, a busy flight attendant, was often away from home and failed to recognize the warning signs. Nicole was living with her elderly grandmother at the time, who also didn't see the full extent of her granddaughter's descent into alcoholism until the damage had already been done. When Gail finally realized the truth, she acted quickly. Despite her demanding schedule, she stood by her daughter, attending therapy sessions and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings with her. Gail's new partner, Rod, became a solid support system for Nicole, embracing her as his own daughter and encouraging her to fight through her addiction. With their combined efforts and her own determination, Nicole managed to turn her life around. She never missed a meeting and approached recovery with remarkable discipline. But years of abuse had already taken a toll. Nicole's pancreas had been badly damaged, and she had to undergo surgery. Even more heartbreaking, the alcohol had affected her reproductive system. She would never be able to have children. In the mid-1990s, as Nicole rebuilt her life, she met a man named David. At the time, she was working at the gym where David was a regular. Tall, fit, and charming, David immediately took a liking to the attractive and strong-willed trainer. Despite being 4 years younger than her, the age gap didn't deter him. They began dating, and their relationship flourished over the next 8 years. In 2002, they were married in a modest but beautiful ceremony in Hawaii, surrounded only by their closest friends and family. After the wedding, they settled into a peaceful life in Linwood, Washington, and purchased their own home. Nicole seemed to have finally found peace, a new beginning grounded in love, routine, and hard-earned stability. She continued working and maintaining her healthy lifestyle, while David remained a devoted partner. But the shadows of her past never fully faded, and lurking quietly in the backdrop of her new life were dangers she never anticipated. Secrets and threats that would eventually unravel everything she had fought so hard to rebuild. Behind every crime story lies the complexity of human struggle, years of pain, recovery, and the desire to escape one's past. Nicole's journey was not just about her addiction or even her triumph over it. It was about her resilience in the face of long-standing trauma. The scars may have been invisible, but they shaped the choices she made, the people she trusted, and the risks she didn't always see. That vulnerability, which made her strong in recovery, also made her a target. What followed in the years after her marriage wasn't immediate. It was slow, a creeping dread hidden beneath the appearance of normalcy. Nicole had survived the worst, or so she thought. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that danger had already entered her life, dressed as something familiar, something safe. For a long time, that danger remained unseen, hiding in plain sight. It would take 6 long years of meticulous investigation to unearth the truth. This case would become a chilling example of how appearances can deceive and how justice sometimes takes time. It would test the patience and persistence of investigators who refused to let a carefully crafted facade stand in the way of the truth. Nicole's story is one of both inspiration and tragedy, a reminder that no matter how strong a person becomes, evil doesn't always strike when expected. Nicole Pitts was known for her warmth, her kindness, and her deep love for animals. Since she couldn't have children of her own, she poured her maternal instincts into caring for her dogs, each one treated like family. Friendly and sociable, she built strong relationships not only with her clients and co-workers, but with every neighbor on the quiet street where she and David lived. The couple appeared to be the picture of happiness, often seen walking their dogs together, smiling and laughing like newlyweds. Nicole was an exceptional cook who delighted in preparing gourmet meals, both for her husband and for guests who often spoke fondly of her hospitality and generous spirit. But in 2006, just days before her 33rd birthday, everything changed. For the first time in nearly a decade, Nicole failed to appear at her Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, an event she not only regularly attended but led. She had become a mentor to others in recovery, a beacon of strength. Her absence sent immediate shockwaves through the group. At first, some feared she might have relapsed, but when she also didn't show up at work that day and her phone remained off, concern grew into fear. By that evening, her mother, Gail, was in full panic. She hadn't heard from Nicole all day, which had never happened before. Gail called David, hoping for answers, but his response only deepened the unease. He claimed he hadn't spoken to Nicole either. According to him, they had argued the night before, and he thought Nicole might just be taking time to cool off. Believing she was still upset, he said he waited until evening to try reaching her again, but got no answer. Despite the troubling silence, David didn't initially alert the authorities. It wasn't until the second evening, when Nicole still hadn't come home and her phone remained off, that the family went to the police. However, police didn't treat the case with urgency. Nicole was an adult, and fewer than 24 hours had passed since she'd last been seen. They classified her as voluntarily missing. No search was launched immediately. It wasn't until the second day that officers began investigating, starting with the Pitts residence. But there were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, no indicators of foul play. Adding to the mystery, Nicole's car was missing. To the police, this initially suggested she may have left on her own. Speculation began to swirl. One theory suggested Nicole had walked out after the argument to punish her husband or take time for herself. Another pointed to her recent use of prescription painkillers for a back injury. Some close to Nicole wondered if the medication had triggered a relapse into substance use after 9 years of sobriety. The darkest theory, however, was the one no one wanted to believe: that Nicole wasn't coming back because something terrible had happened to her. Despite police hesitation, Gail and Rod launched their own desperate search. They used social media to spread Nicole's photo and story, pleading for any tips. They flew to Linwood and Canvas neighborhoods, putting up flyers, talking to locals, and trying to retrace Nicole's last known movements. Investigators worked to track her car, hoping it would provide a lead. But as the days passed with no word, hope began to fade. Then the unthinkable happened. A jogger cutting through an overgrown section of a local park came upon a horrific sight. In the underbrush, he noticed something unusual, something that didn't belong. As he stepped closer, he saw the lifeless, nude body of a woman, beaten and discarded like garbage. The authorities were notified immediately. When forensic teams arrived, they quickly determined it was a homicide. The body had suffered extensive bruising and abrasions, signs of a brutal beating. The cause of death was determined to be manual strangulation. Nicole Pitts had been murdered, choked to death by someone's bare hands. It was a savage, deeply personal act of violence. What made the discovery even more disturbing was the absence of Nicole's vehicle, which still hadn't been found. Investigators now suspected that the perpetrator had used it to flee or dispose of evidence. The once theoretical third possibility, that Nicole had been killed, was now a horrifying reality. Nicole's death shattered the illusion of safety in the small, tightly knit community where she'd built her life. Neighbors, friends, and support group members who had once looked up to her were left grieving and confused. How could someone so strong, so full of life, become the victim of such a vicious act? The brutality of the crime indicated rage, possibly someone close to her. This wasn't random. It was intimate. As the search for answers intensified, so did the scrutiny of Nicole's inner circle. The timeline of her disappearance, the inconsistencies in the stories told, and the emotional aftermath began to point investigators in a direction they couldn't ignore. Nicole's life had been a fight, from childhood trauma to addiction and recovery. But in her final days, it seemed she was battling something far more sinister, and someone somewhere knew exactly what had happened. At first glance, investigators believed the crime may have stemmed from a simple robbery that spiraled out of control. Perhaps the attacker had intended only to steal Nicole's car, but upon being seen, decided to eliminate the witness. Given that the victim was a young woman and found without clothing, the possibility of sexual assault was also considered. The police strongly suspected that the body found in the remote park was that of Nicole Pitts. But it wasn't until her mother, Gail, was brought to the morgue that the identification was confirmed. The moment she laid eyes on her daughter's body, Gail collapsed in grief and needed medical attention. Her husband Rod, crushed by sorrow, stood silently by her side. Yet David, Nicole's husband, reacted in a way that unsettled some. While others were overwhelmed with emotion, David appeared composed, too composed. His expressions of grief came off as strained, even insincere. But grief manifests in countless ways, and at the time, no one pressed the issue. With the investigation now focusing on Nicole's missing vehicle, detectives believed that the car might contain crucial evidence or even point them directly to the killer. An alert was sent out citywide, asking citizens to report any sightings of the gray Volkswagen Polo. Weeks passed before a security guard on the outskirts of the city noticed the car had been sitting in the same spot for far too long. Unaware of its connection to a murder, he reported it. Police seized the vehicle immediately. Inside the car, investigators hoped for a breakthrough. But what they found, or rather what they didn't, only deepened the mystery. The interior was pristine. No blood, no signs of struggle, no hair, fibers, or fingerprints belonging to anyone other than Nicole or David. It looked as if Nicole had simply driven off and vanished into thin air. Still, detectives held onto the car. They were convinced that somewhere, deep within the folds of plastic, fabric, or electronic data, there had to be a clue. The one undeniable truth was that Nicole had been murdered, violently and deliberately. But why? Theories began to collapse under scrutiny. The idea of a carjacking was no longer viable. The vehicle had been abandoned almost immediately and in a relatively obscure location. If theft had been the goal, why leave it behind so quickly and untouched? Another theory pointed to sexual violence, suggested by Nicole's lack of clothing. But forensic experts confirmed there had been no recent sexual activity, voluntary or otherwise. That left a third possibility, an intensely personal motive. The injuries on Nicole's body weren't just brutal. They were filled with rage. She had been attacked viciously, beaten before she was strangled. It was a murder of emotion, not opportunity. Yet Nicole, by all accounts, had no enemies. A year passed. No new leads emerged. The case stagnated. Surveillance footage from the parking lot where the car had been found yielded nothing. The lot was secluded, lacking cameras, and rarely frequented by passers-by. But investigators did note one detail. The driver's seat was adjusted for someone significantly larger and taller than Nicole. Someone had driven that car who didn't match her stature. Then came another strange development. Total silence from law enforcement. The case was given a status of confidentiality. Even Nicole's closest relatives, her mother, stepfather, and husband, were left in the dark. Updates were minimal and vague. A single unsettling clue came through. Nicole's bank card had been used at a gas station days after her disappearance. Footage was obtained, but the contents were never disclosed. Frustrated and heartbroken, Gail and Rod decided to act. They hired a private investigator and began compiling their own evidence. They issued a $10,000 reward for any tip leading to the capture of Nicole's killer. When no progress came, they increased the reward to $35,000. Yet despite the media coverage and public pleas, the case remained frozen. And then David faded from the picture. He had shown concern early on, speaking with detectives and cooperating with Nicole's parents. But after 6 months, he slowly cut ties, first with the investigation, then with Gail and Rod. Eventually, he remarried and fathered a child. This news shattered Gail. She remembered vividly how David had blamed Nicole for not being able to conceive. The thought that he now had a child with another woman filled her with rage and sorrow. Though many saw her suspicions as the product of grief, Gail became convinced that David knew more than he ever admitted. Yet police never considered him a serious suspect, at least not publicly. They continued to treat him as a bereaved husband, not a person of interest. The case might have remained buried indefinitely if not for an unexpected breakthrough. One that would come 6 years later, when a new piece of evidence shattered the illusion of David's innocence and turned suspicion into certainty. Every unsolved murder leaves a wound that refuses to heal. In Nicole's case, that wound bled into every corner of her family's life. Her death didn't just rob her mother of a daughter. It tore apart the foundation of their trust in the justice system. The silence, the secrecy, the lack of accountability. It all painted a portrait of indifference that compounded their grief. Gail and Rod weren't just mourning a loss. They were waging a war for answers in a system that often left them behind. In the absence of justice, time became their only ally. They clung to each shred of memory, to every detail, hoping that something would one day rise to the surface. Grief made them investigators. Love made them relentless. And while the case went cold, their resolve never did. The life Nicole built, the one she fought for after addiction, was brutally taken from her. But the truth was still out there, buried beneath years of silence and unanswered questions. When the break finally came, it didn't arrive with fanfare. It was subtle, born from persistence, technology, and the quiet diligence of those who refused to give up. What the police would uncover after 6 long years would not only change the course of the investigation, it would expose a devastating betrayal and finally bring the dark truth of Nicole Pitts' murder into the light. It was a revelation that sent shockwaves through the community. David Pitts, Nicole's own husband, had been arrested as the prime suspect in her murder. To most observers, it was a stunning twist, a bolt from the blue. But to those closest to Nicole, her family and longtime friends, it was the confirmation of a long-held suspicion. From the moment she disappeared, they had voiced concerns about David, speaking openly of their doubts even when it seemed no one was listening. For years, they watched the case stall, losing faith in the system that was supposed to bring them justice. But now, justice had finally caught up. David had long moved on with his life, relocated, remarried, even fathered a child. When officers closed in and placed the handcuffs on his wrists, he appeared stunned. He truly believed he had gotten away with murder, that the investigation had died out with time. Insisting on his innocence, David volunteered to take a polygraph test, only to fail it miserably. What no one outside law enforcement knew was that the police had suspected him from the very start. They just lacked the irrefutable proof needed to charge him. Instead of scaring him into running or covering his tracks, investigators played the long game, quietly gathering evidence, piece by piece, over the course of 6 painstaking years. One of the first threads came from surveillance footage. Nicole's bank card had been used at a gas station shortly after her disappearance. The man using it wore a hat and dark sunglasses, obscuring his face, but his build, posture, and movements resembled David's. While it wasn't enough to stand alone in court, the footage became a critical component of the case file. Then came the strange discovery of Nicole's wedding ring. She never left home without it, yet it was found at the house, in a box on her vanity. This suggested she hadn't taken it off voluntarily, or at all. The forensic discoveries were even more damning. Inside Nicole's mouth, examiners found a dental mouthguard she had recently begun using to prevent teeth grinding caused by anxiety. She only wore it during sleep. This indicated she was likely killed in her own bed, while unconscious, before she had even started her day. Her body had been cleaned, her face devoid of makeup, and there were no signs of a struggle, all pointing to a murder executed while she was asleep. It also explained the absence of clothing. She had never left the house that morning. David may have thought his attention to detail made him untouchable. But investigators were watching. They analyzed the position of the driver's seat in Nicole's abandoned car and matched it to David's height and build. Inside the vehicle, only 2 sets of fingerprints were found, Nicole's and David's. If a third party had been involved and wiped their prints, there should have been no prints left at all, including those of Nicole and David. But the prints were still there. That detail unraveled his version of events. Perhaps the most incriminating discovery came from digital forensics. Nicole's phone had been used multiple times after her death, likely in an effort to confuse the timeline. But each time her phone pinged a cell tower, so did David's. He had been in the same locations at the same time as her device. It was no coincidence. It was orchestration. Behind the pristine image of a loving couple was a relationship fractured by resentment, infidelity, and control. While Nicole was working 2 jobs, attending AA meetings, and leading others on the path to recovery, David was squandering her income on alcohol, late-night outings, and other women. He could never hold down a steady job, and his behavior spiraled as the couple's financial problems worsened. Nicole begged him to change, urging him to attend recovery meetings to find structure to take responsibility. But David refused. He mocked her, calling her uptight and unfun. Worse still, he repeatedly cheated on her and even pressured her to join in his affairs. On one occasion, he tried to get her drunk in an attempt to coerce her into participating. Nicole confided in her mother about the nightmare her marriage had become. Gail pleaded with her to leave David, to walk away before it was too late. But Nicole stayed. She held on to the hope that the man she loved might one day change. That hope would cost her everything. After Nicole's death, David wasted no time. He immediately pursued a substantial life insurance payout and soon launched into a new relationship. The truth came to light slowly but inevitably. Police uncovered that David had already been having an affair in the months leading up to the murder. Another betrayal layered onto a lifetime of deception and cruelty. David's arrogance had been his undoing. He believed he was smarter than everyone else, that the lack of immediate charges meant he was safe. But the walls were always closing in. Every mistake, every trace of carelessness, every lie, recorded, remembered, and eventually brought to bear in court. This wasn't just a case about murder. It was about the erosion of a woman's life, slowly worn away by the very person who vowed to protect her. Nicole Pitts was strong, courageous, and kind, but she trusted a man who saw those qualities as weaknesses. Her death wasn't the result of a random act. It was the final act of control by someone who had been trying to dominate her for years. And when justice finally arrived, it didn't come with vengeance. It came with truth. In the face of all the silence and inaction, it was patience, science, and relentless determination that uncovered the truth. Nicole's family, crushed by grief but unwilling to let her memory fade, fought for every answer. And the investigators, silent and methodical, worked in the shadows until the story was complete. The arrest wasn't a miracle. It was the result of years of tireless dedication by those who refused to let David Pitts rewrite the narrative. Nicole didn't die in vain. Her voice was silenced, but her truth was not. In the weeks leading up to Nicole Pitts's disappearance, David's double life became dangerously reckless. His affair with a woman named Jane, which had been simmering for months, took center stage. While Nicole was grinding through long workdays and juggling her studies, David spent his nights with Jane, drinking, partying, and spending money that wasn't his. Then, shortly before Nicole's 33rd birthday, the line between betrayal and outright audacity was crossed. David brought his mistress home. What he didn't expect was for Nicole to return early and catch them in the act. The confrontation was inevitable. Nicole, devastated and furious, turned to the person she trusted most, her mother. She confided everything to Gail, who had already sensed that her daughter's marriage was spiraling. Within days, Nicole vanished. From the start, Gail was convinced David was behind it. She knew about the infidelity, the abuse, the financial control. But the police, bound by the law and the lack of concrete evidence, couldn't act. The case was sealed, and Nicole's family was left in the dark, clinging to hope that justice would one day prevail. After Nicole's death, David received a large insurance payout. Money he used not for grief, not for burial expenses or therapy, but to fund his indulgent new life with Jane. Gail suspected Jane wasn't just a passive observer. She believed the mistress may have played a role in either planning or encouraging the murder. Yet despite her suspicions, investigators found no evidence directly tying Jane to the crime. She was questioned, treated as a witness, and then released. The focus returned to David. In September 2013, David Pitts finally stood trial for the murder of his wife. Throughout the proceedings, he maintained his innocence, never wavering in his denial. His defense attorneys initially argued that the case was built on circumstantial evidence. There were no witnesses, no murder weapon, no DNA from a third party. But as the prosecution unveiled the full scope of inconsistencies, motive, and damning digital forensics, the cracks in David's story became gaping holes. Realizing the strength of the case against him, the defense shifted strategies. They tried to reframe David not as a killer, but as a man suffering under the weight of a troubled marriage. They portrayed Nicole as unstable, pointing to her use of prescription painkillers for a back injury. They even floated the claim that she had relapsed into alcoholism, painting her as volatile and impossible to live with. But the narrative fell flat. Nicole's friends, family, and AA community pushed back hard. There was no sign she had returned to drinking. Her commitment to sobriety had never wavered. She remained an active, respected leader in recovery. Even if she had relapsed, as the defense so desperately tried to suggest, it would not explain the level of brutality she suffered. It would not justify murder, and certainly not the calculated, remorseless way David disposed of her body. Eventually, the court saw through the smokescreen. The evidence, when assembled piece by piece, told a clear and horrifying story. David Pitts was found guilty. He was sentenced to the maximum punishment available under the law, 18 years in prison. It was justice, but it was bittersweet. Because under state guidelines, David would be eligible for parole as early as 2025, after serving just 2/3 of his sentence. For Nicole's family, the idea of him walking free again is a cruel echo of the system's earlier failures. A haunting reminder that even when justice is served, it is not always permanent. Behind every courtroom verdict are the people left behind, still grieving, still fighting. Nicole Pitts was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a mentor, a woman who overcame darkness and gave light to others. Her life mattered. Her death was not in vain. But her story is a cautionary tale about hidden abuse, about trust misplaced, and about the long, grueling road to accountability. Nicole's journey should have ended in peace. She fought hard to build the life she deserved. What she didn't know was that the greatest threat was the person she shared her home with. David Pitts took more than a life. He took a future. And while prison bars may hold him for now, the scars he left behind will never fully heal. In the end, it wasn't one moment that brought him down. It was all of them. Every lie, every betrayal, every trace he thought he covered, and the love of a mother who never stopped fighting for her daughter's truth.